Ugh. I stayed quiet when they made Ragnarok. When they made the God of Thunder do this. I did nothing. And I said nothing. And now they've come for my boy. You know, if this show was called The Adventures of Steve, guess what? I'd probably watch it. You take away the Moon Knight costume, and the character would probably be fine. There's only one problem, though.
This isn't Moon Knight!
Oscar Isaac is an amazing performer. He really did make me believe that there are two separate personalities living in that same body. And if nothing else was gained from this show, having him in the MCU is a boon. But this show is plain stupid.
Stupid!
Let's go over the plot one more time. Arthur Harrow is a fanatic who wants to bring back the goddess Amet to cleanse the world of future wrongdoers before they commit their crimes. Meanwhile, Steven is a quirky museum worker who discovers that he sleepwalks a lot. But, for some reason, this person who's been living with trauma for over 20 years, spoiler alert, has both known for a while and only just discovered that he blacks out and does things while he's not paying attention. So he's aware of it enough that he has to surround himself with all these contraptions just to make sure that he hasn't gone anywhere in his sleep. But he's so shocked and surprised by it when he blacks out and kicks ass in front of the fanatics. Yeah, okay. To that end, the person who's trying to recruit him, i.e. Khonshu, scares the shit out of him for a good 40 minutes of screen time, more or less, before telling him nothing at all. He stumbles upon a scarab that he presumably stole as one of his other personas, and despite his best efforts to get rid of it, it stays with him throughout countless encounters that we, like him, do not get to see. Those encounters look like they would be much more interesting than the ones we do get to see, but we don't. We'll get back to this one later. Oh, also, Steven is good with Egyptology and pharaoh shit. Cool. Steven then learns that his other personality has a wife, and this other personality takes over for a while they go on a wild goose chase, ultimately getting killed in the process, then resurrecting in the eternal plane, finding balance, returning to the living world, and fighting the villain. And as I'm doing this summary, I realize that one of the biggest problems of Moon Knight the show is that it doesn't have a strong enough plot to begin with. But whatever, a lot of MCU productions have weak plot and still manage to be fun and a good time. Fine. I don't want anyone to comment that everything has a plot hole if you look hard enough. This is a comic book universe, and comic book universes thrive on attention to detail, so no complaints about that part. Okay, let's get started. Now, whether or not you watched the YouTube short that I made about the first 3 episodes, I'm gonna skip episode 1 and 2 because they're basically how I described them, with a lot, and I mean a lot, of filler. The suit reveal at the end of episode 1 was pretty underwhelming, his punches lacked any kind of impact, and as far as that brutality you see in his blackouts, you don't actually ever get to see Moon Knight kick that much ass, just to be clear. I know it's a spoiler, I'm sorry. I'm gonna skip straight to episode 3, past the meaningless fights in this whole encounter that didn't even need to be there, go to the part where Khonshu had to turn back the stars so he can realign them. Did they not know that there's an app for that? Literally, on the same tablet that Layla was using, there's an app for that. All that fuckery. Pointless. Stupid. Khonshu being imprisoned? Just an excuse to hide the suit that we never get to see for longer than 5 total minutes of runtime. Then comes episode 4, The Tomb. The definition of wasting time. Even though the episode had a lot of decent moments like Harrow's conversation with Layla, and credit to both actors for selling it here, or the brutal zombie thing that was burying the dead for some reason in 2022 even though it made no sense in that context, it was still kinda cool. Apart from all that, the rest could have been done in 5 minutes, which would have saved money on the budget and, you know, made room for telling an actual story. Maybe with some action scenes. I'm just hoping. In my short, I complain about the lack of Moon Knight in costume, and some people accuse me of just wanting action for the sake of action. Well, here's some action in the form of that stupid zombie, and it's pointless. It doesn't serve the story, it amounts to nothing, and it doesn't really take the characters anywhere. See, it was never about the action, it's about meaningful action. This is just fucking around. Wasting time. Then comes the reveal about Layla's father. Now, I really like this part, but the problem is, it only ever comes up when the show needs some tension and goes away too quickly. It came way too late to fuel a much more interesting conflict, and it only comes up for 2 scenes, and neither one of them amounts to anything before being overridden by some other action that happens, i.e. being shot. To be fair, being shot in general does override a lot of things. But are we not going to come back to that? I don't know. Also, Harrow should not be shooting anyone. That goes against everything he stands for and is wildly inconsistent with his character. Use the staff. Just do it that way, or have a henchman do it. But fine. Mark's dead, and now we're on to episode 5. And here's where the show takes a turn for the better, because I love how weird this episode is. Just bring it closer to the middle of the season. Episode 5 is a little bit too late for this. This episode was way more efficient, it delivered some of the most important points, and it was just fun to watch. It was weird. It was an episode where we didn't need to see Moon Knight, we got to see the characters. I'm glad they didn't show him, because it matters what we think when we stay focused on Mark, Steven, maybe others, and their internal struggle. If I could change something, I would change the baffling decision to tell us about the expedition of Layla's dad, instead of just showing it. They showed the last end of it, but that's not what I'm talking about. Wouldn't you want to see Moon Knight exact revenge on all those mercenaries that killed innocent people? Wouldn't that be justified action? And it would also justify the brutality and cool shit that Moon Knight can do against those mercenaries. The people who killed Travelers of the Night. It kind of fits there. It would also tell us a lot about his motivation to become that hero. Isn't that a stronger motivation than, I don't want to die? Vengeance. Get it? Also, I think they should have added a reason for Steven to sacrifice himself, or for Mark to go instead, because losing him apparently balances Mark out, even though it would have made much more sense for Mark to fall off, since Steven and Jake balance good and evil much better. If you lose all the good in Steven, how do the scales balance with Mark and Jake? Maybe there's more to it, but the show doesn't waste any time telling us. It's happy to waste time on other points that amount to nothing, but this one crucial point about how the fuck the scales can even balance with the two worst people objectively in there is still a mystery that really needed to be addressed in some way. But never mind, it was fun, I'm ready for the finale to bring it home and forgive and forget. But then comes episode 6. This is apparently Khonshu's reason for having Moon Knight at all. Protect the Travelers of the Night. How? How exactly does Moon Knight protect the Travelers of the Night? Who do they even mean by Travelers of the Night? The expedition? That's a one and done deal. Why is Khonshu doing it? Why is Mark Moon Knighting as Moon Knight? This show is kind of a semi-origin story, right? I mean, things have been happening already, but we're still learning about the character. So can we give the character a primary motivation? Being trapped is not really a motive. When he rejects the suit, it's almost a no-brainer to us. There's no conflict between, do I keep the superhero personality, or do I lose the superhero personality and gain my freedom? It's an obvious choice. Of course, if someone's trapping you like this, get rid of the costume, fuck the whole thing, fuck the whole gig. But the missed opportunity here is, they could have given Moon Knight a reason to exist, a reason to cause conflict. Do I need to lose this costume and gain my freedom, or is there something more important that I want to hold on to by holding on to this costume? Making it almost a no-brainer to dump it at the end kind of defeats the whole purpose of creating an origin story for a character. This is more like an ending. I complained about the lack of action in my short, and some half-wits thought I meant I want to see people hitting people more, or more car chases. That's not it at all. Superheroes are defined by the people behind the mask, but they're also defined by their powers and how they use them. We see this in the form of action, but that means any action while in character. But dude, isn't the person underneath still the main defining character? Not necessarily. Sometimes it depends on their identity. Sometimes it depends on how secretive or anonymous they are. Sometimes it's their attitudes towards others while being behind the mask. Power does change people, even when they're not paying attention. It's why Bruce Wayne still identifies as Batman at his core, but can never behave like Batman when he's Bruce Wayne. Seeing his actions behind the mask tells us way more about him than seeing him outside of his costume. When Moon Knight does his thing, we get to see how he handles extreme power. That moment when Mark held back on hitting the child, that would have been 10 times more interesting if he did it while in the suit, especially knowing that he's able to punch like a truck. That gentleness hidden inside the brutality would have created more of a likable brute in that character, which is always what the MCU seems to aim for, likable characters. As a bonus, it would also show us that Mercy is still in there somewhere, so he's kind of still in control. Remember that scene from my summary where I said we would get back to? Well, here it is. Do you know what the problem is with that scene and many others like it? They make it look like whoever takes over and kicks ass has this crazy ability to fight. But then we get to see Moon Knight fight, and there's nowhere near that sense. You could argue, like the apologist you are, that was Jake and they were saving him as a surprise, but I'm watching a TV show now. And if you don't have setup and payoff inside your TV show, not even inside the season, then it becomes boring and full of broken promises. And speaking of promises, when we watch a scene like that, the blackout, Steven not knowing what the hell's going on, there's an inherent promise to eventually show us what's gonna happen. Eventually show us Moon Knight kicking ass. That promise is never fulfilled. We never get to see any of that. While that may be a creative choice, and not because it didn't occur to them, I still feel robbed. It doesn't feel good. A bad production can be hard to analyze because so much of the responsibility is shared by the cast and crew. But one thing I'm sure of is it's also tied to broken promises and disappointments. You want a clear example of that? Check out the new Multiverse of Madness. In that movie, the trailers, and even sometimes the movie itself, looked like they were setting up something much bigger or a lot more interesting or wide-spanning. And understandably, people were disappointed when they got to see how it was. I don't see any reason why Moon Knight should get a pass here when this movie doesn't. On top of all of that, the rules are inconsistent. Can Khonshu act on his own or can he not? What rules are these gods following? Who made them up? Why can some of them break them and some of them not? Why can he break it towards the end and fight her hand to hand? I know she was released, but does that count for all released gods? Were any of them ever imprisoned? Who cares? Can the suit heal Mark? Can it amplify his powers? Is he bulletproof, or can he just Wolverine his way through them? Is Steven a good fighter? If he is, then that would explain episode 6, but we know he isn't because we saw episode 3. I know what you're gonna say here. They both have access to the same abilities, therefore Steven and Mark can both fight. If that's the case, then why can't Mark understand hieroglyphics? If their abilities are not like their memories, they're inherent and accessible, Mark should have been able to understand the hieroglyphics. He could be surprised by it, but he should have still been able to understand it, because they are his abilities. So either you stick to that rule or not. You can't have your cake and eat it too. See, you have to design these things up front. The whole reason why the MCU works in the first place, especially the Infinity Saga, is because Kevin Feige had an idea and he stuck to it. He also had an emphasis on consistency and setting the rules. They had no problem going back and fixing it whenever they needed to, but in general, as a comic book reader, you look for specifics a lot more than the layperson. Kevin Feige knows this, and that's why whenever those rules need to be broken, there's always a big fat explanation around it. For someone like Mark Spector, his power changes dramatically between his human and Moon Knight form, I presume. This would have presented an interesting dynamic that needed to be explored further. Instead, the series just sidesteps all of this in what seems to be like an attempt to keep us intrigued in the mystery and just drags on for literal hours. But you keep someone intrigued for that long and you just give them blue balls. There is no gratification. That is the series' biggest sin in my opinion. The delayed lack of gratification. Because this feels like a Fox movie. This feels like what an old person's idea of a superhero show would be. They're stingy with showing the hero in the action. Either they're embarrassed about it, or they just don't know how to write stories that include big fights and superheroes, or they just don't know how to fit the superhero aspect into real. Whatever their excuse is, this problem has already been solved in the MCU. So it's really frustrating to see anyone struggle with it this hard. It's like it missed the seminar on just the basic setup of these things. I mean, can any of these things break a show? No. But when you fuck up everything else, it just makes all the other problems stand out. If the show isn't holding my attention and intrigue, if the show isn't speaking to me the way it's supposed to, I will start to see past the seams and the ripples and beyond the veil. And that's never good for a show. If we wait so long to see Moon Knight, and then when we get to see him, we see him for 2 seconds doing something completely subpar before waiting a whole other episode to see him. And the next time it's also subpar. The action is just not MCU worthy. It's certainly not $150 million budget worthy. I'm not going to waste time judging it on comic book accuracy because I know that's not how the MCU works, and none of the great movies did that, so I'm fine with it taking its own route, and I really like the twist with the different suits for different characters kind of thing, but I'm still judging this as a comic book fan, as a Moon Knight fan, and as an MCU fan, and understand when I say that it could have been better because we have already seen better from the MCU. In my YouTube short, I brought up Batman, and I brought up Batman for a reason, because that movie is full of efficient storytelling. Bruce Wayne's sunglasses in the house moment, his terrified reaction to flying over Gotham. We didn't need to hear him say any of it, we just get the basic concept of it on an intuitive level. And to be fair, Moon Knight had a couple of good scenes like that, like when Mark held back his fist before slapping that kid, but most of the time, everything just went nowhere and added very little to an already crowded exposition suit. At the end of the day, I'm glad I'm in the minority here. Or at least I hope I am. I know it makes more sense for me to want people to agree with me, but I don't. I want more Moon Knight. And the more popular this show is, the more likely it's gonna have more seasons. Moon Knight will have more appearances, and we got Oscar Isaac out of it. There's even a chance of it being handled by a different crew, maybe a better crew, or maybe this team learning how to handle him. I would have been way more forgiving if this was a small production with a less experienced staff. I know the director is new. It is a valiant first effort, but for $150 million from one of the biggest companies in the world, run by one of the smartest people in the world, I don't think it gets a pass. And it shouldn't get a pass from you either. We should demand better. Thanks for watching.